Good evening, friends. We are glad to welcome you in our today's exclusive open session on how reading science and innovation news can inspire your kids to become a future innovator, which is hosted by StudentEdge newspaper, which is India's one of the leading newspaper and children's favorite newspaper too. Friends, we conduct these kind of live sessions very often in order to keep up the children's development, which is very important in today's competitive world. And today, let's understand how reading science and innovation news can help your children to become a future innovator. Let me tell you the topic of the sessions that is scope of science and innovation news, role of science in building children's future, how science helps children to become a future innovator, redefinition of innovation, student edge newspaper role in building children's career. And this live session is going to conduct by Ms. Swasti Pachori, who is the senior faculty at Vision IES and professional at social sector. Now, without taking too much of time, I would request Ms. Swasti to take over the session.
Hello. Start करूँ मैं? Thank you so much for that generous introduction. And today we are going to be discussing something very significant. The topic, of course, is how reading science and innovation news can inspire kids to become future innovators. Here's the slideshow. Now, ये slides कैसे बदलेंगे? अच्छा, on the laptop. Okay. Sorry. तो ये this is the structure of the presentation. Sorry. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Okay, all right. So we'll start again. Thanks a lot for the generous introduction. Today's topic is very interesting. It is basically how reading science and innovation news can inspire kids to become future innovators. This is the brief structure of the session today. We're going to be discussing a little bit about how science, innovation, and creativity are all interlinked. Why must children and students read science and innovation news? Why early interest in news and disciplines like science and innovation is important. And then, of course, we are going to be discussing some examples of innovations that were undertaken by children specifically, students, kids, during the time of COVID-19 lockdowns. We'll also be talking about some examples of news related to science and innovation. What are the different kinds of things, the books, newspapers that one can read to develop that curiosity, to actually help develop interest in topics related to science, innovation, invention, discovery, technology, and so on. Now, let us just briefly discuss how are these three interlinked, science, innovation, and creativity. I think when we look around us, everything is an innovation, everything is an invention. And innovation essentially encourages people, students, children, everybody to explore, to dream, to research, to discover, and most importantly, to imagine. I think imagination is key over here. When we read news items that are related to science, that are related to inventions, various kinds of discoveries that are happening all across the world, the first thing that happens to the human brain is that we start imagining. For example, when I say the color green, different kinds of images come to people's minds. Somebody may just imagine a tree, someone may imagine a green colored cloth, someone may imagine a green colored toy, or a green colored book, or a green colored magazine, and so on. So these three are interlinked, and the most important aspect to these three is imagination, because there can't be innovation without imagination. And therefore, innovation and imagination, these two are intertwined. They involve a new way of thinking, thereby helping students develop their creativity and, most importantly, their problem-solving skills. We'll come to this a little later. But if we were to move to the next slide, let's just understand a little bit how innovation enhances a child's creativity and his or her potential to imagine. For example, if you imagine clay, what are the different things that one can do with clay? When I was a child, I used to make different kinds of artifacts with clay, different types of toys with clay. And today, several years ago, when there was an earthquake in Gujarat, there was an entrepreneur there who developed a refrigerator out of clay. It's called Mitti Cool. So these are the different types of things we do when we have some sort of an object in front of us. Clay is just one example. One can do different kinds of things with paper. There's a gamut of art that happens with paper and magazines. You can make different kinds of crafts, you can make arts. So again, imagination is key, which leads to innovation. I still remember when I was a child, I think I was in grade 7th, and it was my science project for which I did I developed this game called Elements and the Symbols, in which what I did, I took a sweet box, an empty sweet box, I covered it up with beautiful paper, and I had elements, for example, oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, etc., etc., on one side of that box, and I had that symbol. I had the symbols on the other side of the box, and I had some wiring happening under that box, and there was a little bulb. It's very difficult for me to explain without a pen or paper over here, but nonetheless, I hope you get the idea. So when I would touch, say, carbon, and if I would, on the other side of the box, if I would say go on nitrogen, the bulb wouldn't light. But once I would touch carbon with the wire, and when I would go to the symbol of carbon, which is C, the bulb would light. Now these are the different games, these are the different kinds of experiments all of us as children that we have done. आप लोग भी सब अभी अपने स्कूल्स में होंगे या कोविड के समय पे भी हमने देखा होगा, और बचपन से ही, जैसे फॉर एग्जाम्पल whenever a solar eclipse would happen, there's this very popular project which kids do, which is basically developing a solar eclipse viewing equipment, or maybe making some kind of friendly solar cooker. We all have spent winters, people who get abundant sunlight in their houses, we've all done these little experiments where we've made these solar cookers and we've tried cooking something, for that matter, observing a flower, for that matter, under a microscope. The first time I remember when I went to a science laboratory in my school, I remember I observed a flower under a microscope, and it opened a gamut of thoughts in front of me. I realized there's just so much more to what we just see. We just see a flower, but when you observe that under a magnifying glass or a microscope or any other equipment through which you can see the various details of that flower, this is just another world. So which is why I think innovation helps us creatively imagine. It helps us view things which are just not there in front of us. And there are several such examples. I'm sure today when you visit, of course, schools have been shut during COVID. But if you remember the time when you would go freely, you would walk in freely to a biology laboratory or a physics laboratory, there are a range of experiments that are there. And I particularly gave the flower example because it really stoked my interest in disciplines like botany, disciplines like biology, and also environment, ecology, all these kind of subjects. So when you see, when you observe things around us, when we see and observe things around us, there is this incredible power and this infinite power that just multiplies, and we imagine, and we therefore try and innovate. So therefore, innovation enhances a child's creativity and his or her potential to imagine. I've already given you the example of clay. I've talked about the elements and the symbols game that I made. There's a very famous painter by the name of Claude Monet. He actually was a gardener before he became such a big painter, before he became such a famous painter, because he used to paint flowers all the time. And one of his paintings called Water Lilies is very, very famous. So that's the thing really. What I'm trying to say is how imagination and curiosity are linked to creativity and invention, creativity and innovation. I'm sure some of us play Sudoku puzzles, math puzzles. We play different vocabulary crosswords. I'm sure all of us have tried to observe different things with telescopes, or we've tried to make telescopes at home. So these are things that we all engage in when we try to imagine, when we try to learn about more and more things, and we try and explore our world with different lenses. Moving on, let us now briefly understand how reading news related to science and innovation, how that helps. Now, as I said, it's all about learning different things. It's all about being open to the idea of learning, reading about different things, and most importantly, science and innovation here in this case, because that's the topic for the day. So reading news and books related to science, technology, and innovation, it obviously it helps you to become innovators. It helps you to become people with leadership abilities, people who can actually invent, discover, create, build. We've got several examples of startup organizations, entrepreneurs. We'll come to these details in a bit, where we talk about how children have invented things. They've made different kinds of apps. They've made different kinds of projects during COVID-19 lockdown. And that's actually been very, very welcoming. Because during COVID, there were certain restrictions, there were certain kinds of constraints that suddenly came in, and kids were actually using their power to imagine, using their power to create, invent, explore, learn, unlearn, and they finally came up with products that actually ended up helping people. So one of the things that, of course, helped these kids, these children, these students to make these different kinds of apps and projects was their ability to think. And that ability to think actually comes directly from the kind of things that you read. It is extremely important to read. I'm sure all of us realize that reading is definitely mentally stimulating. It actually helps you grow in life. So reading books, particularly to news and books particularly related to science, topics related to science, related to different discoveries that are happening, these encourage innovative thinking. These encourage creativity and, of course, inventiveness among children. It's very important to develop our creativity right from the time when we are children, right from the time when we are kids, because that's when our brain is slowly developing, and that's when we need to be more focused about developing different kinds of reading habits, developing different kinds of interests. Secondly, it enables us to think, like I said, it enables us to explore, and most importantly, it nurtures our problem-solving abilities. Each time we walk into a physics laboratory or a chemistry laboratory of our school or any other laboratory where some kind of experimentation is happening, some kind of thinking is involved, some abstraction is involved, or some kind of a problem exists in front of us where we need to just understand the problem and do something with it. Building blocks is a great example of how inventiveness gets instilled in our minds. Further, it encourages reading skills, and children and students read more as a result. Obviously, now, for example, if I were to tell you, earlier this year I read something about, purple mangoes being grown in the state of Madhya Pradesh. Now, that was so new to me. I suddenly thought that this is so new. I mean, till now, I have not heard of something like that. And that actually motivated me to read more. It motivated me to actually understand a lot more about the ecology, about the environment of Madhya Pradesh, understanding how is it that we are growing purple mangoes. So basically, when we discover something new, जब हम कुछ नया देखते हैं, उसके बारे में पढ़ते हैं, तो हमें मन करता है कि हम उसके बारे में और ज़्यादा पढ़ें. कितनी बार ऐसा होता है कि हम देखते हैं there's some discovery happening about some archaeological cave somewhere, or some scientist has discovered some planet or some comet, and we start reading more about it. So if we have a curiosity in us, if we have that power to actually imagine, if we have that potential in us to actually think, we start reading more and more. And reading has to be inculcated from very early on in life. Reading just doesn't mean reading for examinations. It means reading for larger development of our brain, our minds, our personality. Because reading directly tells you, reading actually helps you understand people. It helps you understand yourself also. So therefore, when we talk about why it's so important to read about science, it's a direct, the direct corollary, the direct result of that is that automatically our reading skills, they enhance and they become better. Our comprehension improves, and this prepares us for life. Because, when we are kids and we are reading about different topics, and when we come to standard 10th, standard 12th, it also helps us in our different examinations. Not just that, when we finally then go to college to, study graduation subjects, it again helps us over there. So reading ability automatically increases. Our comprehension abilities increase when we start taking interest in topics related to science, in topics related to technology, innovation, etc., etc. Of course, then, like I said, that sometimes scientists discover something new. That sometimes we read about some new species of some insect being found, or new species of some flower being found, and therefore it helps us. It helps us to update ourselves as far as newer trends in discoveries is concerned, as far as newer trends happening in the whole discipline is concerned. So that is another benefit of reading more and more about these topics. Of course, it then also inculcates out-of-the-box thinking. It helps in developing future leadership skills. Like I said, we have a great example, Mark Zuckerberg. We have so many other people who've invented, who've created different kinds of technological products for us, which have now created a revolution. So these are some of the points through which reading about these topics help us. Now let us, these are some examples that these were really some qualities that we can develop as people when we read about these topics. But then there are these other factors because of which we should be taking more interest in these topics. Now, why is it that early exposure to news and disciplines in science are important? Now, let us just understand that a little bit briefly. Now, there's a rising focus on STEM. What is STEM? STEM is the short form of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Over time we have seen there's a lot of focus on why is it that in particular girls, why is it that we should be encouraging girls, why, not just girls but everybody, but most importantly girls, because the representation of women in STEM is a little low. So why is it that we should be reading news related to science? Because there's also a rising focus on STEM, there's also a rising, the increasing focus on STEM. And that is because a robust STEM education system, it creates critical thinking skills, it creates critical thinkers, problem solvers, and like I said, next generation innovators. So it is also said that India is one of the countries that produces the highest number of scientists and engineers, and thus the growth of STEM has picked up significantly over the last few years. And therefore, I think this is one reason why reading science-related news, reading technology-related news, innovation-related news should be important. Then the second reason, I think yesterday we had the civil service results come out, and we saw that the first ranker is actually an engineer. So presence in civil services and government exams, there's statistics that that's been, that say that every year there's, especially if I were to quote this fact that's in front of me, that 57% of civil servants in the 2020 batch were actually engineers. This is not to say that other disciplines are not important. This is just statistics that tell us why is there so much focus on science, why is it that students consistently read or study these subjects. So therefore, this is another reason that when we develop interest in science, like I said, we develop our problem solving abilities, we actually develop our critical thinking skills, and that these are really helpful skills, when it comes to taking different kinds of exams, not just related to government jobs, but any other exam, any other job in life. These skills really help us. Next we have, there's a lot of focus on entrepreneurship. Now we talked so much about imagination, we talked so much about curiosity, we talked so much about creativity. Now all of these are essential ingredients for entrepreneurship as career options for all of us. We've seen that schemes like Mudra scheme of the government of India, there's the Startup India, Stand Up India scheme. These schemes have supported entrepreneurs, they've supported women entrepreneurs also. And then there's Delhi governments, recently they launched something called Business Blasters program, which basically has encouraged students at the Delhi government schools to recreate things, to actually take up ideas in which they are interested and make projects with them. There's also the Delhi government's entrepreneurship mindset curriculum, which is widely talked about, which actually helps students think like entrepreneurs, develop their entrepreneurial potential. And then, of course, there's another example. During the 2020 lockdown, there was something called the Innovations Unlocked Kerala Student Innovators Meet by the Kerala Startup Mission, which really focused on select innovators to groom them as entrepreneurs during the July 2020 lockdown. So that's the other reason. So we discussed three reasons up until now. The first one was there's a rising focus on STEM education. Number two, reading these different kinds of news items, they actually help you develop your problem solving abilities, your creative thinking abilities. Number three, increased focus of the government on entrepreneurship, also because people are now increasingly taking interest in becoming entrepreneurs and innovators. And the final reason, of course, is that there are a lot of government scholarships also that encourage and enable students to take interest in topics related to science, developing their careers in these fields. So for example, there's something called the programs like the Million Minds Augmenting National Aspirations and Knowledge Program. It's called the Manak program by the Department of Science and Technology in partnership with the National Innovation Foundation, that emphasizes on the power of ideas in young minds. So this is basically one scholarship program. It's called the Inspire Awards Manak program. You can read more about it on the website over here. It's a great program, and just look at the criteria. Who can apply? Any student enrolled in class 6th to 10th at any recognized school, government or private, aided, unaided. So if you've got some idea, why don't you take interest, and why don't you have a look at this website and probably read a little bit more about it. So that's that. Now let's discuss a little bit about the innovations that we've seen that happened during COVID-19. Like I said, children were so enthusiastic. I think one of the reasons for that is also because the schools were shut, and children and students probably wanted to use their creative thinking skills, their imaginative skills, and their potential. So many of the students and children, they ended up doing some great things with their time and their skill and their talent. So let's see this one example, which is basically how a group of teenagers from Delhi, they built a robo to protect healthcare workers by reducing their contact with the novel coronavirus patients. The names of the students are there on the slide. Nishant, Saurav, Aditya, they developed something called Robo Prithvi. The source of this news item is India Today. Prithvi allows a smart tablet to be linked to it in order to enable video conferencing between doctors and patients. Now this is so innovative, and this is so important at the same time, because during COVID, obviously, we had to all follow social distancing norms. We had to all minimize contact with the outside world so as to break the chain. So Prithvi was one robot which the students from a Delhi school, they developed, and the team planned to add a temperature feature to the robot to also minimize the contact with patients. Now there was another example called the touchless doorbell. Okay. Now here there was a student, a class 11 student of modern public school in Delhi, Shalimar Bagh, who developed something called an automated touchless doorbell called Arduino with ultrasonic sensors to ensure that the visitor does not have to touch the bell and minimize the chance of coronavirus spread. So, these are two examples, and now let's move on to the third example. One is there was something called the portable ventilator, where two brothers, Karthik and Vinayak Tara from Haryana's Ambala, they came up with a portable ventilator made of wood, which is uniquely designed, keeping in mind the importance of social distancing between medical staff and COVID-19 patients. They created a wooden structure in which the ball is fixed between two walls. When pushed, the ball gets pumped. The whole structure is fixed with a motor that moves automatically with the time set which is required to pump that ball, and this whole circuit is programmed in a way that it works automatically. Now the ventilator is also connected to a circuit and is interfaced with a mobile app so that patients' health can be monitored closely through the mobile app. Again, a great example, and the source is of course here from where I took this example. Then we have another example where a student called Adityan from Kerala, he was 9 and he developed a mobile application. Now I was talking about how kids, because of their consistent reading, because of the way they have actually developed their minds over time, taken interest in these subjects, how they have come up with these innovative options, innovative solutions to problems. Somebody has made a robo, someone's making a portable ventilator, somebody is making something else, someone's making an app. So this is all what is it that we can do? Someone can be good at art and craft. They can come up with some kind of an innovation in art and craft. Someone can make a someone can make an environmental friendly solution to something. So there are so many options. There are so many different opportunities available to us in the world. It all depends on how we take interest in reading. It all depends on the different kinds of topics that interest us. When I was still studying at school, I used to be so fascinated with physics. I used to be so fascinated with astronomy. I used to always try and make some kind of a telescope on my own. I remember going to different kinds of planetariums and just looking at the kind of shows that they would run, teaching us about different planets, teaching us about the solar system. So it is about the interest that we develop early on in age. And how does that happen? It happens with our reading, with our exposure to different kinds of tools. It could be sci-fi films, it could be science-related movies, documentary movies, literature that is available to us. I think NCRT books are great. Any school curriculum that gives you good knowledge on science and technology related topics. Then of course there are these experiments that we all can do under the guidance of our teachers, of course, at schools, at laboratories or online classes, howsoever teachers teach us. All these things develop early on in childhood. We need to be focused enough, we need to be understanding what is it that interests us, what is it that actually inspires us and also keeps us motivated, right? So I was talking about the student from Kerala who developed this app, and of course, you know, he started uploading mobile apps on Aptoid, which is an alternative marketplace for mobile apps and runs on Android. So these are some examples that can help us remain focused, remain motivated. It can inspire us to read more and more, to develop our interest and to be future innovators for the benefit of society, for the benefit of ourselves. There's another example called the ambulance whiz. Now this was also made by an 8-year-old child called Brinda from Bangalore with a vision to help ambulance drivers quickly navigate their way through busy and crowded metro city roads. Now this is so beautiful because we all see there's so much traffic sometimes on roads, and because of that the ambulances cannot reach the hospital or the patient's home on time. Now this girl, she actually developed an app which helps the ambulance drivers, you know, so innovative and so thought-provoking as well at the same time. It just goes in to show that Brinda over here, she actually understood the problem in such depth that she came up with a solution which is so efficient, which is actually so relevant in today's times when we see so much of traffic everywhere and we can't reach places on time. So there was Ambulance Whiz. Now this app that she developed is actually designed to act as a bridge between ambulance drivers and the traffic police, with the driver being able to select the type of emergency, including pregnancy, heart-related disease, accident, among others. Now just imagine the kind of thought that this girl would have had while she was making this app. It requires thinking, it requires curiosity, it requires creativity, and it requires knowledge, and of course innovation. How is it that all of these things can be put together, and you know, how do we do that? By reading more and more, by keeping ourselves aware of what's happening around us. Similarly, there's an app called Parently. Now Parently, this was developed by 12-year-old Arush. Okay, what is Parently? Parently has brought a completely new concept to the world of apps, a virtual parent. Okay, now this is again, I mean, but with these examples, we're just trying to actually understand how many different opportunities actually exist in front of us. COVID-19, we all had online classes, schools were shut, we had so much time to read different kinds of things, so much time to spend on thinking about different kinds of things, so much time to actually so much time to develop interest in different kinds of topics that interest us. Somebody would have read so much about nature, someone would have read a lot about environment, someone would have read a lot about sports, for example. Someone would have read a lot about discoveries happening everywhere across the world. Someone would have spent time on reading about health because COVID was going on, is still going on. So what I'm trying to really say, what we're trying to really understand today is that we develop our reading and our thinking abilities by first developing our interest in the topic that most interests us, right? It could be environment for somebody, it could be nature for someone, it could be fiction for somebody, it could be literature, it could be art, craft, whatnot. Science and innovation, of course, is one such discipline, is one such area where if we develop interest, where if we start reading right from early on in our lives, we tend to gain more and more. That is not to say that we should just be reading about this, we should be reading about other topics also. But right now we are discussing how reading more and more about these topics can actually help us become future leaders in these disciplines. It can actually help us become future entrepreneurs, future innovators, right? So how to read science and tech news. Now we've discussed so much about, we've discussed a lot about what is it, why is it that we should read, what are the different things that we should do. Now how to read science and tech news. Now I talked about books, I talked about different school curriculum books that are recommended, different other kind of books that may be available to you. These could be fiction, these could be novels that talk about important discoveries, these could be probably autobiographies, or rather books written on scientists or by scientists, and of course magazines, right? Now this reading science and this whole thing of science and innovation, how is it that we keep reading about it, these can play a pivotal role in building all of these skills that we have discussed, right? Creativity, knowledge, so on. Now in a highly interconnected world, knowledge of current affairs is obviously key. Now unless and until we don't know what's happening, unless and until we don't know what's going on in the world, it's very difficult for us to even develop interest in something, right? So therefore, reading newspapers is key. Whichever newspaper appeals to you, whichever newspaper you can most easily understand. There could be some some student-oriented newspapers. There's a newspaper called StudentEdge, which probably students can read, children can read. There'll be other newspapers that actually focus on all these kind of inventions and discoveries and explorations happening all across the world. So student-friendly newspapers actually, these cultivate reading skills, curiosity, scientific temper, consciousness towards the environment, and inculcates social sensitivity among children, right? Of course, because there are dedicated pages for science, history, geography, computer, moral education, lifestyle, books and movies, news related to different states, world, etc. Some of these student-friendly newspapers have got puzzles, they've got sudokus, they've got worksheets, they've got interactive exercises which you can do on your own or with your friends, or by taking help of someone. And also they try and build your thinking skills, creative skills further. So these newspapers can also play a pivotal role in helping you prepare for future career options, right? You could become an entrepreneur, you could become, probably if we develop interest in reading news early on, we may want to be a writer someday, we may want to be a science writer, right? Or we may want to write a government exam where news play a critical role. So therefore, as and when we read more, we develop more and more interest, right? And I already discussed how the kind of different kind of books that we can read, different kinds of fiction that we can read, and of course probably we can watch some kind of documentary films and so on. The key is to develop interest now, so that in future this interest remains in us. And it's not necessary that we may develop a career in this field. We may actually be someone else tomorrow as far as our career goes. But the interest remains. For example, I still read a lot about botany. I still read a lot about astronomy. I still follow news related to space. I don't have a career in that, but that interest that I developed in my childhood, this whole thing of making a telescope, trying to experiment and trying to observe different stars, trying to understand how is it that the dynamics of space functions and so on. I still have that interest in me. I still read about these topics, and that interest has stayed. And it actually helps me think, it actually helps me imagine so much. So therefore we need to develop interest right at the start, and to develop interest we need to be reading more books, more newspapers, more magazines, watch things that are related to things that interest you. Somebody may be interested in environment, someone may be interested in news items related to discoveries that are happening every day. So we need to keep reading so that our interest grows and grows, okay. Now this is just one example what I was telling you, this for example I was talking about this newspaper. So now these different kinds of cuttings, this is from I think StudentEdge newspaper, different kinds of news. Now you see one news says that capturing water from air without electricity. Now how inventive is this, right? If students read this, they may actually get ideas, and they may also try and read more and more about these things later. Similarly, these oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. Then we have these other two news items. Just look at this. Graphene, the thinnest material in the world, can detect COVID. Now these are such new pieces of information that actually help us keep our interest intact. Now for example, if students were interested in making a COVID related app, or if there are students related in making some app that's relevant for today's times, reading such type of news actually gives them more information, more knowledge, and therefore they can keep honing their skills, they can keep refining their skills so that they become better and better with their thought process. They become better and better with their imagination, and therefore they can invent better, they can discover better, they can explore better, they can actually research better, and they can create much better, right? So this is why reading these different kinds of versatile pieces of information on topics that interest you, topics related to these, science, health, all of that, space, technology, what's happening in the world of information technology, what's happening in robotics, what's happening in, for example, artificial intelligence, these things, and of course, at the same time, environment, nature, arts, crafts, music, sports, all of that helps us to keep our interest intact. It helps us to grow, it adds knowledge, and therefore it actually enhances our creativity to experiment, okay. So we've learnt basically how reading news related to these topics, even fiction, develop skills like curiosity, imagination, creativity, leadership, problem solving abilities, independent thinking among children and among ourselves. Now if there are any comments or any questions, I can probably take them. ये prompter है क्या, कोई अगर question पूछ रहा है या कुछ? अच्छा ये है नहीं इसमें कुछ. क्या कुछ आ रहा है क्या? उनको ना वहाँ से
So, friends, I hope now you have got to know how reading science and innovation news can weigh you better to become a future innovator. Now, at last, I would like to tell you about our children's newspaper, Student Edge, which is specially designed for the children of all age groups. This newspaper is designed by the team of IIT and IIM alumni, which helps the kids to get ready for the various competition. Student Edge has dedicated pages of science, history, geography, computer, moral education, lifestyle, and state news, world news, competition, and scholarship, etc. It includes the worksheets also to practice for the kids, which will automatically get your kids ready for the competition. So make your kids future ready with the Student Edge newspaper. Friends, you can download its digital copy, free digital copy by logging to our website. Our website address is www.studentedge.in, and you can take the monthly subscription and annual subscription as per your requirements. So thank you, friends, and we look forward for your such a participation for the future sessions too. Good evening, and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.